Cain injected the substance into his body. The very next second, his skin began to break down under everyone's watchful eyes. His internal organs and blood vessels became visible. As the experiment continued, his muscles slowly faded away, leaving only a skeleton. In less than 30 seconds, even his bones disappeared. It was as if he had completely vanished from existence. It turned out that what he injected wasn't a poison, but an invisibility serum. This experiment allowed subjects to turn invisible, but reversing the effect was extremely difficult. Cain was the lead scientist in charge of the project. One day, he suddenly had a breakthrough and identified a possible formula to restore visibility. A new round of experiments began. They started by testing on a gorilla. They removed the cloth covering the animal. Then they tied a tourniquet around its arm. After spraying a blue solution, they successfully located a vein and injected a red compound. What followed was the moment they had all been waiting for.
Elevated heartbeat. We're still in the green.
Confirmed. Beginning cellular reaction.
Just as the gorilla was about to reappear, something went wrong. The animal suddenly became aggressive, and after a brief spike, its heartbeat stopped. Fortunately, the team reacted quickly and immediately brought out a defibrillator. They performed emergency resuscitation on the gorilla's chest. Unfortunately, there was still no response at first, but then, at that critical moment, its heartbeat finally stabilized. Soon after, its body continued to recover, and its bones and muscles gradually became visible again. After 2 long minutes, the gorilla had fully returned to normal. All the researchers celebrated the success, but Cain remained calm, because testing on animals was only the beginning. Success would only count once it worked on humans. The next day, during a report to General Castor, Cain deliberately concealed the true progress. He claimed the experiment was still in the recovery phase. This shocked Linda. General Castor had already grown impatient and gave him only 2 weeks. After leaving the office, Matthew questioned Cain about hiding the truth, but Cain understood the situation clearly. If he revealed the progress now, the project would be taken away immediately, so he chose to keep it from General Castor and proceed to human trials. Both Linda and Matthew strongly opposed the idea. The side effects were too severe, and things could easily spiral out of control, but Cain insisted on moving forward with the experiment. The next day, Cain lay on the operating table. The team secured him with restraints, but when it came time for the injection, Cain decided to do it himself. As the serum entered his body, everyone waited for the results. Time passed, but nothing seemed to happen. Just as they began to think the experiment had failed, Cain suddenly felt something. Under everyone's gaze, the transformation began.
Here we go.
He's going.
As his bones slowly faded, only an imprint was left on the bed. The team was thrilled the experiment had finally succeeded. Cain, however, fell unconscious from the intense pain. When he woke up, he immediately began to struggle violently. The bright lights made him extremely uncomfortable. Linda quickly moved the lights away to help him adjust. Once Cain got off the table and tore off all the monitoring wires, he completely disappeared from their sight. Although his body was invisible, there was still a way to track him. With a thermal imaging device, his position could be identified. For safety reasons, Cain was required to remain in the observation room. Infrared cameras above ensured he wouldn't leave. At the same time, a colleague stayed in the control room to monitor his movements. That night, Sarah was exhausted and fell asleep in her chair. Taking advantage of the moment, Cain quietly slipped into the control room. He gently ran his hand through Sarah's hair. When she noticed her collar had been loosened, she instantly understood something was wrong. She called out Cain's name, but there was no response. She checked the monitors and saw that Cain was no longer on the bed, but in the brief moment she turned around, he had already slipped back into place. Even when Janice went to the restroom, she felt like someone was nearby. She kept a thermal imaging device with her at all times, just in case. During meals, everyone expressed their growing fear. As they were leaving, a chair quietly turned on its own. Everything they had discussed had already been overheard by Cain. Soon, the 3-day mark arrived. The restoration experiment officially began. As the serum was administered, blood vessels in the heart began to take shape. It then spread throughout the body, gradually restoring Cain's human form. But just like the gorilla, Cain began to struggle violently. He realized he couldn't breathe.
Get him on the table!
The team rushed him onto a hospital bed. Another emergency rescue effort began. Although they managed to save his life, the restoration failed. His body disappeared once again, returning him to an invisible state. This failure dealt him a heavy blow. Cain no longer wanted to endure judgment from his colleagues, so he decided to use a special compound to create a physical outline for himself. In the following days, they continued the restoration experiments. Countless injections every day took a toll on his body. For safety, Linda insisted he remain in the observation room. Although it was meant as protection, Cain could no longer tolerate it. He walked out without hesitation, desperate to feel the outside world again. Soon after, Cain drove his luxury car through the city. Cain returned to his home. By chance, he spotted the woman across the hall once again. The emotions he had suppressed for so long began to erode his moral restraint. And now, his invisibility gave rise to darker intentions. Taking advantage of the moment while she was showering, Cain quietly rang the doorbell. To his surprise, the woman didn't open the door, but instead looked through the peephole. Seeing no one outside, she turned to walk away. Cain rang the doorbell again. This time, he slipped inside unnoticed. Having lost control, Cain forced her onto the bed. A few minutes later, the woman curled up in fear, trembling as she cried. Meanwhile, Cain walked over to the window and saw Linda arriving to look for him. All she found was the outer layer he had left behind. When everyone gathered back at the lab to figure out how to bring Cain in, he suddenly appeared at the doorway, claiming he had only gone home to grab a book. When Linda questioned him, he immediately used his authority as team leader to shut her down. But that very night, something unsettling happened again. As Linda slept, her blanket was slowly pulled away. Fortunately, it turned out to be just a dream. Fully awake, Linda quickly answered a phone call. A colleague told her there had been progress with the restoration. She rushed back to the lab and waited with the team for the results. Unfortunately, just as it reached 95%, the experiment failed again. This pushed Cain over the edge. He could no longer tolerate being confined. He secretly altered the surveillance system, looping a recorded feed. Then he quietly slipped out of the lab. He made his way to Linda's home. Unaware, Linda and Matthew were both inside. They checked outside the window, but saw nothing. Linda immediately contacted the lab to ask if Cain had left. The colleague, still watching the monitor, believed Cain was in his room, but Linda had a strong feeling that he was nearby. Even when the bedsheet fell to the floor, nothing was detected. To be safe, she decided to return to the lab. When she checked Cain's bed, he was nowhere to be found. Examining the surveillance footage, they discovered it had been tampered with. The team gathered once again to discuss the situation. They realized that Cain's behavior had crossed a dangerous line. For everyone's safety, they decided the situation had to be reported. Unbeknownst to them, Cain heard every word. To avoid being captured, he followed Linda to Dr. Kramer's house, but Linda acted quickly, blocking the door with a table. This prevented Cain from getting inside for the moment. After they left, Dr. Kramer tried to report the situation to General Castor, only to find the phone line had been cut. At that moment, the back door suddenly opened. Meanwhile, Linda discovered the lab's phones were no longer working. When she tried to use the elevator, the access code had been changed. Everyone was now trapped inside the lab. Through the intercom, Cain addressed them like prey. He claimed he had already killed Dr. Kramer, and that no one would leave alive. The team rushed to the control room. Using thermal imaging devices, they scanned the area. They soon spotted Cain's position, just as they prepared tranquilizer guns to capture him. Janice's sudden encounter threw everyone into panic. No one knew what he would do next. For now, their top priority was to escape. Linda quickly formed a plan. 2 team members would work on cracking the code, while the other 2 would try to capture Cain. She stayed in the control room, relaying his position, but what they didn't expect was that Cain used a ventilation shaft to split the team apart. During the earlier struggle, the cooling system had been damaged. The temperature began to rise. Soon, the thermal imaging devices became useless. Fortunately, Matthew had a fire extinguisher, which could help reveal Cain's movements.
Even with Linda.
Just in time, Linda arrived and pulled Matthew to safety. Elsewhere, Sarah found a severely injured colleague. To perform a transfusion, she rushed alone to the medical room, but just as she gathered the supplies, the door suddenly shut. It was clear that Cain was nearby. Thinking quickly, Sarah grabbed a blood bag and splashed it across the floor. If Cain stepped on it, his position would be exposed. But after waiting for a while, nothing happened. Letting her guard down, she prepared to leave with the blood.
Oh, get up!
Meanwhile, the injured colleagues succumbed to the injuries. Now, only 3 of them remained. They returned to the medical room and discovered Sarah's body. As the 2 examined the scene, Cain appeared once again. He locked Linda inside the blood storage room. Then he lowered the temperature, intending to freeze them, but Linda stayed calm. Using a crowbar, she pried off the door handle and tied it with a metal wire. After removing the defibrillator, she connected its terminals to the wire. In this way, she created a makeshift magnetic device. Turning it on, she used it to latch onto the handle outside. With the strong magnetic force, she managed to pull the door open. The 2 of them escaped. Meanwhile, Cain used experimental materials to build a small explosive device. Just as he finished and prepared to leave by elevator, Linda suddenly arrived. Water began pouring down around them. Cain revealed himself and launched an attack on Linda. After knocking her down, A powerful surge of electricity ran through Cain's body. He stopped breathing, but when they returned to the lab, they discovered the bomb had only 30 seconds left. The two immediately ran for their lives. They tried to escape using the ladder inside the elevator shaft, but before they could climb far, the explosion tore through the lab. At the critical moment, the cables held the elevator in place, saving them. Just as they were about to leave, a hand suddenly grabbed Linda. Cain was still alive. He tried to drag Linda down with him. And in that final moment, he even tried to get close to her.
One last kiss.
Go to hell.
In the end, Cain disappeared into the flames. Linda and Matthew managed to escape. At last, the nightmare came to an end.